Today's topic, deep and wide. Deep and wide, there's a board game collection deep and wide. Do-do-do-do-do-do-do. Welcome to TABLEscraps, short discussions about board, card, and tabletop gaming, submitted by the viewing audience and discussed with the viewing audience. Hi there, and welcome back to another episode of TABLEscraps, the live streaming show where we discuss a topic about tabletop, board, or card gaming with the live streaming YouTube audience. I'm your host, Chaz Marler, and today's topic of discussion comes from viewer Patrick Doss, who poses the following question. He asks, is it better to go wide or tall with one's gaming collection? When it comes to building up a collection, is it better to go wide, that is, buy more games for added variety, or is it better to go tall, that is, acquiring expansions for the games already procured? On one hand, purchasing more games gives the group a bigger selection of different experiences, but on the other hand, expansions are typically cheaper to buy than a whole new game and can enrich the experiences that the group already enjoys. That is an interesting question there, Patrick, and honestly, one that I struggle with myself. Boy, there's so many variables in this that I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to comment on this intelligently. But then again, why worry about starting now? Okay, the first train of thought that you mentioned is, do I get a wide variety of games for a wide variety of people and players have a wide variety of experiences? Well, that depends partially on your, quote-unquote, position within your own gaming group. It seems like every gaming group has one or two people who are kind of the group's librarians. They're the people that have the most games, typically. And in that case, they're kind of the curator of the games that are available to play. So other game groups, though, everyone has something and they get together and they each kind of contribute and maybe cycle through the games that they all bring to the table. The reason I struggle with this concept, though, is that you're then buying games that you yourself are not necessarily as interested in. And if your game group members ever change, or you move, or something else happens where you're not playing with those people, well, now you're collecting games that you were collecting as a librarian and not necessarily to enjoy and play. That can really be tricky. Now, I will admit that I do that to a certain extent. I think I've made other videos and stuff that talk about the concept that every game on my shelf is on that shelf because I have been either standing in a store holding the game or looking at a game online, and I've had someone pop up in my thought bubble that I think they would really like this game, or I would really like to play this game with this person. And when someone pops into my thought bubble that I would like to share the game with, 99.9% of the time, that is what causes me to purchase the game, to commit to purchasing it. So the thought bubble concept is kind of similar to being the board game librarian. However, I feel that without the thought bubble, if it's just like, oh, I'll get this game, so I have a, social deduction game in my collection to choose from. Well, I'll get this game because I have a hidden movement game now in my collection. Well, there's dozens and dozens of each of those types of games. There's so many different social deduction games. There's no guarantee that the one that you pick is going to be the one that they enjoy. They might like a different social deduction game. And now you're stuck with a game in your collection that you didn't even really weren't as interested in the first place, and it's not going to do anything. And now it's just going to sit on your shelf as a dust ornament. But there's so many different ways to come at this. So I could go on and on and on and on and on. And I think for all of our sanity, I won't. Instead, I'm going to turn over to the YouTube chat and find out what others are saying about this in a segment we like to call The Rest of the Show. Let's start off with a comment by MM, who just puts it out there on the table for us bluntly. May as well just buy all the games. And that certainly is the temptation, isn't it? And I am going to uncharacteristically not endorse buying all the games. I am going to come at this from a stick in the mud, fuddy-duddy, wet blanket mode and saying that could actually be a more dangerous approach that could be more detrimental to someone's enjoyment of the hobby long-term than being more fastidious with your collection. Ha! I bet you didn't expect that, Eminem. I bet you didn't expect that either, because that's not your name. Let's see who else's comments I can ruin by going over to Barry, who says, rule number 1, never consider it a collection. Call it a palette of colors. Just get 1 or 2 of all the colors that you like. Barry, that's great. And I think I've heard you talk about this a little bit before, about the collection or collector mentality. I've heard, if not from you, I know I've heard it from others, that calling it a collection can be a dangerous thing because it becomes something where adding to it just for the sake of adding to it becomes an objective. And I think that that can be dangerous. That's why I kind of refer to mine sometimes as a library or shelf full or a burgeoning avalanche of fun. Now I'm just making up words. That's why I oftentimes will try to get myself to refer to it as just my, a library or my shelf of games or something. And even library. I'm not sure if I like that word better. Is there a better word for your game collection? Oh, there's that word again. That can help convey the idea of a group of games without having the collector acquisition mentality to it. Anyone has a phrase for that? Let me know in the comments below. Kabuki says, I think the easy answer is a mix. Get a variety to cover the group's likes or moods, but also focus on a genre that you really like. Like if you like dungeon crawls, load up. And that's a really good point. And it reminds me of something else about Patrick's original statement that I wanted to address as well. He talks about how focusing in on one game and getting its expansions can oftentimes be cheaper than just getting a wide variety of games. And honestly, I don't know if that's really the case anymore these days. I'm thinking Star Wars Rebellion. Its expansion is $40+ for the new Star Wars Rebellion expansion. And then I'm thinking about like Descent. If you just get Descent and all of its expansions that come out like every 6 minutes, it seems, you could very likely end up spending more on Descent and all of its expansions than you would just getting a variety of board games. So I think that the rationality of, I'm just going to get expansions to flesh out my existing games can be just as expensive of an approach as just getting a whole bunch of games. I don't know. Continuing on to Derailer, who says, why not add component upgrades to the expansion debate? Cheaper to pick up and enhance the current game. Oh no! Component upgrades. Okay, there's a whole pit to fall into right there. You know, one of the reasons why I don't often mention component upgrades in a conversation like this, I usually talk about it as a specific thing, is because of a lot of people see them as just, a fun side thing to do that doesn't really have anything to do with adding more games to their collection. The other reason why is because money. Some people see component upgrades as really expensive. And other people, it's completely subjective though. Other people will say, hey, great, I'll invest in that. When I talk about component upgrades, I don't like to talk about it in an environment where price is one of the things being talked about, because it's so subjective. One person's expensive upgrade is just a given upgrade for another person. So it can make some people feel uncomfortable in that respect. If that makes any sense at all. Hopefully it does, because I'm moving on. Kazencha says, I enjoy exploring new mechanics, so I doubt I could stop getting new games totally. But expansions are usually safer purchases. If I like a game, I'm likely going to enjoy its expansions. That's a very good point, is that in getting an expansion, yes, you are basically getting an apple where you already have an apple versus getting a tomato where you had an apple before, because you're not sure, is this game going to be another apple or is this game going to be a tomato? There's also the possibility that it's a banana. And don't even get me started on kumquats, because, can I start over? That's a really good point. And if you're trying to make wise investments in your board game collection, investing in something that's related to something that you already know that you like, an expansion related to a game you know that you like, that can actually be a good approach. So that is definitely something I think is worth adding to this conversation. Jonathan mentions both deep and wide. Wide. Tastes change, so you can always adjust what you collect. So Jonathan, that is a little bit of both. Yeah, that's probably the most logical approach to this. That brings up a good question. If we were to take deep and wide as the two different aspects of how to build a board game collection, what percentage do each of us do? Is my collection 35% deep, and whatever the other percentage would have been that I would have said wide, how does mine compare? And do we see a trend that most board game collections are, 65% deep and 35% wide, or vice versa? And is it actually something that we all do in a certain manner and don't realize because we've never broached the subject with each other because Patrick has never brought it up before? I'd be interested to know. The next comment in the list appears to come from Barry, who asks, Chaz, have you grown out of the thought bubble game purchasing mentality? Because I have. Interesting. Actually, no. To be honest, it has actually increased. As my board game collection has neared the point where I consider it kind of full, and I'm almost entering that, as I add a game, something else has to come out because of the limited space I'm allowing for my board game collection. As I have hit that point, I've had to justify my board game purchases with myself more and more. And the thought bubble concept has definitely been a method that I use to justify the purchases. So for me, have I outgrown that mentality? No, I have done the opposite. I have actually become more dependent upon it. Gazencha says, I've never gotten games for other people, except for the occasional game that I'm only going to get to play at conventions, but I do tailor my purchasing for my current gaming situation. That is, I'm mostly playing games with just my husband or solo. I'm not going to get 3+ player games, however interesting they may be to me at the moment. That is a challenge, definitely, and the kudos to you for being able to pull that off. I myself am in a similar boat, but I fail at it a lot more than you do. I want to play more games with my wife, but I keep finding myself purchasing games that I really like playing games with 3 to 5 people because you can have more interaction and little, alliances going on. So those two approaches contradict each other. They conflict with each other. So being very mindful of that when you're purchasing games is definitely something that's very important to keep in mind as well. So thank you for reminding me about that. T2 says, cop out, but it depends on the game. Some add more content to something you already like, which is great. Some completely change the game into something else, make it feel like a completely different game. If you can pull that off with your expansions and the games in your library, I think that's a really good approach. If you can get expansions that you can add or leave out that give you a different twist on that game, it is like you're getting a twofer. You're getting 2 for 1 out of the deal. So that actually can be something to keep an eye on, definitely to give you the best of the both worlds, the Dwide, as Jonathan mentioned. So I think that's definitely a good idea for us to keep in mind. Eric mentions, hopefully it's something you really like. The day it gets old, you're kind of stuck. I admit that I'm in favor of wide, since it's typically all about playing games with others. Yeah, that's a really good point. And a wide also, there are times that if you go narrow, and like say you get Descent and all of its expansions, there's going to be days where you want to play a light card game. So that mix, like I mentioned before, having a mix of some wide and some narrow, or whatever we're calling it now, that can be nice. Jacob mentions, I love having a diverse game library. I have games for different moods, different groups, different playing time, etc. So yeah, there you go. Jacob's comment takes what Eric started there and just elaborates on it in even more detail, putting it even more eloquently than I ever could hope to. So I think the important thing to take away here is that I am so jealous of Jacob's comment. And let's wrap up today with a comment from Jeremy, who says, I think it depends on how many games you have. I go with wide. I may go deep later, but I'm just starting in the hobby with less than 40 games and my group only playing board games before D&D. Jeremy, that I think is absolutely fair and accurate of my own history in the gaming. When I got into gaming in 2012, when I really got back into the hobby of modern board games, I remember purchasing as wide a variety of games as I possibly could. It was all, part of it was because I wanted to build a library of different options to be available to me, depending on the mood, the time, and everything. I experiment with these different mechanisms and everything. And yeah, as my collection has kind of filled in, I have narrowed a little bit, actually, now that you mention it. That is true. So yeah, I think that's another aspect of this. The wide versus narrow, I think it also has to do with how long you have been involved in collecting modern board games. So I agree. It's definitely something that probably changes over time. And speaking of time, we are unfortunately out of time for this episode, but I encourage you to continue this conversation either in the YouTube comments below or over on the Pair of Dice Paradise Facebook page or Twitter, where we are at Dice Paradise. And also, episodes like this are made possible by viewers just like you who have been supporting the Pair of Dice Paradise fundraising campaign. Right now, the campaign to finance 2018 is going on, so every contribution that has come in has been helpful and really appreciated. So thank you all for your help with that, and we'll see how far we can go. But in the meantime, we've gone as far as we can, and so we're going to wrap up this episode, but soon we'll have another discussion with the YouTube live streaming chat where we will serve up some table scraps. Thanks. We'll talk to you again soon. Just says, if I like a game, I'm likely going to like it. Flaily arms. All right, fun to watch the sausage being made. Sometimes it feels like we're making sausage here, just with the guts of the show flying all over the place. Definitely. Chaz will have a 2-minute video after editing. Yep.